Gwen. T-1 day to the biggest wedding in the world. Standing on the sidewalk outside the Grand Hotel, Gwen Parker squinted into a surprisingly bright Friday morning in the centre of London and confirmed her decision to give her latest crazy scheme a shot. Crazy had already proven to be surprisingly effective. She was having the best week ever of her career. There was no reason to back off now. Gwen was no stranger to London, but in the run-up to the royal wedding between Prince Richard and his bride-to-be, American singer Meredith Bast, something special had happened to the city. It wasn't simply the novelty of seeing familiar haunts plastered with excessive amounts of springtime flowers, Union Jack bunting, and ridiculous commemorative souvenirs. It was the communal sense of pure, unbridled joy.
Realm presents Royally Yours, Episode 1.
Gwen tossed her empty coffee cup in a trash can and took in a deep breath, a little high on the vibe. She absently patted her camera, confirming it was still at her hip, and gave herself a moment to soak in this new version of London. It sure was nice while it lasted, the sunshine included. The city was packed, with tourists and locals alike, shoulder to shoulder at every corner. But everyone took the crowds in stride. Even a seasoned New Yorker like Gwen would have a hard time frowning at the fun and the fantasy of this occasion. So, yeah, she'd walked these streets 100 times before. She'd come plenty close to royals before. She'd gotten lucky with her photos from here in the past, although not as lucky as today. But there was something special about a divorced American celebrity marrying into the British royal family. Like anyone, even one who'd been as doomed in love as Gwen, could find their prince. As she walked the popular route between her hotel and Buckingham Palace, she recognized more than a few fellow paparazzi. She called out a greeting as she passed a British photographer, alongside whom she regularly shot celebrities and royals coming out of nightclubs and restaurants. He made an X with 2 fingers as he barreled past her on the crowded sidewalk, shouting, "Nice get, Yankee." X. Ah, X. She grinned and gave him a mock salute, acknowledging the praise. He wouldn't hesitate to trample her for a great shot, but at least he gave credit where it was due. Which meant Gwen was sure to score a free drink off him the next time the photog scrum met in the belly of the Hound once the wedding chaos was over. Her shot of Meredith's ex-husband entering a London hotel was currently featured on top of the Daily Mail's website. Not to mention, she could probably get the photographer to spring for a side of Scotch eggs when he got around to seeing her credit on that sneak preview of Princess Georgina's wedding hat too. Between the 2 photos, Gwen's bank account was going to be squarely in the black. Nice. Maybe she should pack it in and take care of some other projects. Go rest on her laurels, save some energy for the wedding day tomorrow. But there was still plenty of time to get one more winner and make those other photog boys who like to stand in front of her at shoots pay some overdue respect. Being a paparazzo wasn't rocket science. But Gwen didn't just leave getting her shots to chance. She researched, she planned, she memorized diagrams and floor plans, and timed things out. Doing all this homework had finally paid off with an unbelievable amount of success this week. And she had an idea for one more, the cherry on the sundae. A shot of the wedding preparation from inside Buckingham Palace. You could say she'd done her homework there too. But she hadn't planned to sleep with Jack Churchill last New Year's Eve for strategic reasons. Meredith Bast hadn't even received her royal proposal back then. Nope. Gwen slept with Jack because he was tall, dark, and handsome with a swoon-worthy British accent, and the sort of contradiction of personality that spoke to both mind and body. Perfect manners at the bar, and just the right amount of bad behavior upstairs in her hotel room. It was complete coincidence that he'd come into the Hound, a popular watering hole under her rooms at the Grand, that night for drinks with his buddies. All of them active duty soldiers who'd received the honor of a stint with the Queen's Guard. She hadn't asked Jack to practice his favorite military maneuvers on her after midnight because she was a paparazzo who liked to take pictures of royals and he had a key to Buckingham Palace. And it wasn't because she had an inkling that a royal wedding was coming down the pike and she was setting herself up for a clear shot through her telephoto lens. If she'd done something that gross, at least she would have done it properly and not snuck out of bed before he woke up in the morning. It was because Jack Churchill was hot, flirty, and the perfect ratio of gentleman to soldier. No strategy, just good old-fashioned drunken primal attraction. Anyway, she'd always kind of regretted sneaking out of bed like that. It was a defensive maneuver, a knee-jerk reaction to being post-sex friend-zoned too many times by sweet-talkers who purposely gave her the wrong idea to get into her pants in the first place. And there was nothing to say she wasn't wrong to leave Jack behind in such a way. Maybe it was meant to be. Having a one-night stand with a guy who guarded Buckingham Palace suggested that he'd recognize her and hopefully help her, without the baggage of a failed relationship to make him think twice. The gates of Buckingham Palace were absolutely packed with people awash in a sea of red, white, and blue. It took her a good 20 minutes to plough her way to the front, and that was with throwing plenty of elbows. Well, not at the children and little old ladies. Gwen liked to think she had standards. When she finally made it to the front of the mass of giddy humanity, she saw him. Jack Churchill was on duty as expected, standing proudly in the sentry box. The red coat molded to his broad chest, and the dark blue trousers emphasized his height. 6 feet and counting, Gwen thought a little breathlessly. The furry skyscraper hat was a wild card. She bet it could look a little nuts on some of the guys, but on Jack Churchill, it just made him look British and badass. These people could only imagine what he was like out of uniform. Gwen grinned. She didn't have to imagine. Well, she was at the right place. Her plan wouldn't work with just any guard. It had to be him. "Hi, Jack," she called, approaching with camera in hand. It was always weird to go up to the Queen's Guard in front of the public, but the camera acted like a kind of shield. Naturally, he didn't answer. "Hi, I'm Gwen. You know, the redhead from New Year's Eve?" She pointed to her hair. She'd tamed her usual mass of bright curls into a much more constrained style. Something that wouldn't attract as much notice if one was to, say, find oneself inside the palace on ad hoc business. No easy feat, but necessary if she was going to pull this off. Queen's Guardsman Jack Churchill didn't move a hair. Of course, the Queen's Guard wasn't allowed to acknowledge or respond unless they were being threatened. And even then, the most they were supposed to do was point that bayonet rifle at you and shout, "Make way for the Queen's Guard!" They'd practiced exactly such a scenario together on New Year's Eve, only he'd used something else as a stand-in for his bayonet. "Gwendolyn Parker, American photographer from New York, ringing any bells? I had a great time with you." Shit. Okay, this is getting embarrassing. She thought he'd at least throw her a spark of recognition or something. Maybe he really didn't remember her. Nah, that was hard to believe. They'd worked on international relations that night for a solid 4 hours at least. Gwen pretended to search through her camera bag. If her research paid off correctly, this was just about the end of his 2-hour shift. Well, here goes nothing. Gwen took a deep breath and prepared to cause a scene.
Jack. Seriously? Oh, he remembered her. Gwen Parker was the girl who never looked behind her. The girl who had something to do. The girl who ran. From her own hotel room, no less. He struggled for a moment not to laugh. She'd left him alone in her bed after a very memorable New Year's Eve before he could get her number. It was an unfortunate oversight, but he couldn't actually regret it. They did, after all, have their hands full all night. Now here she was, standing there with a camera and a not guilty look on her face. She was staring at him, like she kind of forgot she was supposed to be taking a picture or something. She was also staring at him like her mind might likewise be replaying the greatest hits of their night together. She'd pulled her hair up in a fancy twist, and she was wearing a serious blazer instead of a sequined strapless thingy, but this was definitely the same girl. Jack forced his eyes to focus away from her. The last thing a guardsman at Buckingham Palace needed was a stiffy. Not that anybody would notice through the heavy wool trousers, but while he often enjoyed the opportunity to be in his own head and process his thoughts during a shift, standing still for 2 hours with a massive cock stand was another story. So he told his brain to go think of something else besides Gwen in bed on New Year's Eve, and scrolled his mind for distraction. He tried counting things, many things, people in his range of vision who had Gwen's ginger hair, the number of times someone erroneously shouted the words, "Hey, beef eater!" trying to get his attention. And then he recited poetry and song lyrics and started planning a week's worth of dinners, until he noticed from his peripheral vision that Gwen was swaying slightly, one hand up to the side of her head. Bloody hell, the girl is going down.
Gwen. 1, 2, 3. On 3, Gwen buckled at the knees and fell, sprawling on the ground in a manner that would have made her improv troupe back home proud. Except, ow! A sharp pain shot through her temple, like she'd managed to fall on a small rock or something. Well, shit, that was lame. She stayed on the ground and touched her head. Big mistake. Her fingers came away bloody, which promptly made her sad-ass self totally nauseated. You big baby, Gwen. Even worse, Jack was leaving his post. Leaving without a backward glance at her pathetically sprawled on the ground. Maybe he doesn't remember. Maybe that night was just one of many... Ew, that's so gross. She frowned. He doesn't even care that I am possibly in dire need of medical attention. He doesn't know I was faking it up until I actually made myself legitimately nauseated. It felt like the blood was sliding down the side of her head. If she had to look at it again, she was going to lose it. And, strangely enough, it really bothered her that Jack hadn't remembered her. Even if she had been intending to fake a faint and deserved to be ignored, Gwen realized that she'd been excited about the prospect of seeing him again. A nice lady in a Team Meredith sweater, decorated by a trim of British and American flags, helped her to a sitting position. "I'm good," Gwen said loudly, to shake off additional help. The biggest issue was making sure she didn't bleed on herself. She'd dressed for the palace today, a stereotype of the super-efficient, behind-the-scenes wedding planner working bee sort, which meant a crisp white blouse, navy blazer, dark skinny trousers, and the navy version of those nude L.K. Bennett pumps the Duchess was so fond of. All this capped off by a lightweight travel trench, currently threaded through the straps of her designer messenger bag. She rummaged in said bag and found a lens cloth, which she used to plug the cut on her head. "Everything's fine," Gwen said, swatting away the bystanders who were trying to help her. "Damn waste of an afternoon. You're getting exactly what you deserve. Nothing." She stood up and sent a woeful look at the new guard who'd taken up his shift in Jack's place. And then she did a double take. Jack Churchill was barreling toward her like a soldier on a rescue mission, parting the crowd like a grenade was about to go off. He'd dressed hastily. In fact, he was underdressed for the weather. Like he'd taken off his uniform very quickly somewhere behind the scenes and hadn't put on a sweater before running back out to her. To me? To me. When Jack finally reached her, all Gwen could do for a moment was stare. He looked massive from her vantage point on the ground. Tall, sleek dark skin, beautiful brown eyes, particularly fine forearms, all muscled and delicious and... Uh-oh. Jack's brown eyes narrowed at her, looking all business. That's fine, Gwen. Get over yourself. That's all this is. Business. Put your arm around my neck, Jack said, and his voice was just like Gwen remembered. And then he lifted her in his arms and carried her the way a prince would a fairy tale princess, behind the gates of Buckingham Palace and toward the guardhouse. Bingo. With great purposeful strides, carrying her as if she weighed nothing, Jack Churchill spirited Gwen away from the public. He hurried, though, which gave her the impression that he either thought she was worse off than she was, or he didn't want to run into anybody. In no time at all, Jack brought her inside the west side of Buckingham Palace, around the area where she recalled the guardhouse was from her diagram. He turned a couple of quick corners, then pushed her through a door into an extremely small room with stone walls, at which point he gently deposited her on a cot. To distract herself from the temptation of doing a fist pump while yelling, "I'm in Buck-fuckingham Palace!" she took stock of the room. Her eye caught on wall hooks holding a couple of hangers, a garment bag for his uniform, and a more casual jacket for the outdoors. A minuscule side table held a roll of paper towels, a box of tissues, and a metal military-issue first aid kit. Her eye went to the tiny kitchen area. Not even a kitchen. A sink and a mirror, a rigged-up shelf for snacks, and an electric tea kettle, plugged into an extension cord, poking through a hole in the wall. And then her eyes landed back on Jack, with his long legs clad in jeans, crossed at the ankle by a pair of tan military-style boots. His upper body sported only a white t-shirt that was snug enough to show off every goddamn muscle in his chiseled physique. She forced her gaze up to his face. Jack Churchill did not look pleased. Well, he was going to look even less pleased soon, but he didn't know that yet.
Jack. It was all coming back now. Jack remembered how much fun it had been spending time just shooting the breeze with Gwen at the pub, even before their epic roll in the sheets. She was plenty full of shit, of course, being a paparazzo, but full of spirit, too. From his perspective, Gwen had managed to find in her own life the equivalent of Jack's ideal sweet spot, that which was located between the hard-scrabble danger of a soldier's life on duty in hotspots abroad and the quiet honor of his stint as a Queen's Guard now. She'd figured out how to turn real life into an adventure, and he recalled very distinctly how every second of their acquaintance at the Hound had felt as if he discovered something, someone extraordinary. She's got something special, this one. And then, of course, he'd blown it by going too fast and taking her to bed. And then she'd blown it more by running away even faster. "Where are we exactly?" Gwen asked. "It's kind of an unofficial break room." "Yours alone?" "Yes. There are nooks and crannies like this all over. You earn the use of one via seniority." "Cool." "Ow!" Gwen pulled at the grey cloth she'd been holding up to her head, looked at the blood-soaked fabric, and blanched. Jack pulled himself out of his reverie and went to retrieve the first aid kit. "You want to tell me what's going on?" he asked, pulling out some gauze and ointment from the tin and proceeding to gently clean the cut on her head and then apply a plaster. Because no way, no how was Gwen sitting in front of him by accident. On the other hand, this cut was legit. He frowned. "What's your game, love?" "I forgot to eat breakfast. This must seem weird, us, meeting again like this." "You don't say." "I don't have much here other than a few snacks." He grabbed a box off his snack shelf and shook a bunch of nuts and dried fruit onto a plate. He pushed it between them and then realized Gwen's hands were dirty, so went back for some damp paper towels and settled down next to her. There was a faint scent of perfume about her, maybe something left over from showering in the morning, just like the hint of sweat from being bundled under multiple layers along with a lovely floral body wash. Shite. He was noticing it because it was familiar from their night together. Stop thinking about that. He picked up her left hand and gently washed the grime and blood off, glancing up for a moment to catch her staring at him with what he could only describe as a hot look. He'd got his own blood thrumming for a moment before he caught himself and focused on cleaning her other hand. Then Gwen let out a long breath, fanned herself, and started chomping down the snacks as though she hadn't eaten in years. You drinking enough water? Jack asked. I've got a bottle in my bag. Take it out then and have a drink. Gwen arched an eyebrow, but she didn't look all that annoyed. Jack bit back a smile. He remembered she liked taking orders. Just thinking about it made his heart beat even faster. She did as he told her, gulping water before suddenly saying, You never asked for my phone number. And you never asked for mine, Jack said mildly. He gently tested the staying power of the plaster he'd placed on her head, and then tossed all the first aid supplies back into the kit. In a somewhat more suggestive tone, he added, Not to mention, if you were interested, you would have stuck around long enough to rectify that in the morning. I wasn't not interested, she said. I had to go to work. Also, to be honest, he continued, I don't love your occupation. The paparazzi are generally shits. Gwen rolled her eyes at Jack. Blah, blah, blah. The operative word being generally. Not all of us are terrible. And if it's any consolation, not all the terrible ones are terrible all the time. Jack shot her a look that said he wasn't consoled. I never got to know if you were one of the terrible ones. Don't worry, I have standards, Gwen said sweetly. Anyway, thanks for the rescue. Oh shit, is my camera okay? She leaned forward and grabbed her bag off the floor, wincing a little. Jack sat back and watched as she checked out her camera, fiddling with the aperture before holding it up to her eye for a close-up. Of him. What are you looking at? He asked. Your mouth, she said in a deliberately seductive tone. My mother is a dentist, Jack said. I didn't realize the English had dentists, she said, winking her free eye. Brat. I know, awful stereotype. Sorry, you really do have gorgeous teeth. Man, we Americans are all so boorish. He chuckled. I take it you're feeling better now? Better, Gwen said. Well, this is all really warm and snuggly and kind of awesome, to be honest. But I have to get going. She put the camera away and stood up. Jack cocked his head. You should rest another moment or two. I've got stuff to take care of, she said. He looked away in case his disappointment was obvious. I'll see you out to the street. That's not really necessary. You can just point me in the direction of the exit, and I'll skedaddle. Oh, bloody hell I can, he said, barking out a laugh. Is there a problem? She asked in a too innocent voice, grabbing her parka. I'm just not about to let loose a paparazzo inside the palace, regardless of our past. I wouldn't say we had a past. Then why did you show up here, in front of me, on my shift? That was no coincidence. I like you, she said brightly. Try again, love. Gwen wrinkled her nose. I'm not sure whether to be disappointed by the fact that I've been made, or highly turned on by the way that sounds with a British accent. She walked toward him to look out the window. He didn't move to make space and towered over her. You have wiles, he said, not entirely accusing her of something bad. I do have wiles. Wily wiles, she said, with a seductive purr. Jack smiled, shaking his head. Too bad you have to go. So if I open this door, are you going to promptly leave the premises? No, she admitted. Jack sighed and leaned against the door. In that case, would you like a cup of tea? Because I'm not opening this door. Gwen frowned, but he just smiled a Cheshire cat smile, and all she could do was sigh. Tea would be great. How do you take it? Jack asked. He grabbed the tea kettle and started filling it with water. Like a proper English rose, of course, Gwen said with a grin. Jack burst into laughter and shook his head. I'll put a bit of milk in it. Gwen shrugged and looked at the door. Jack studied her face. You don't want tea. You want to run, he said softly. I'll walk you back out to the gates. Gwen smiled and nodded. He turned off the kettle and gazed at her for a moment. She had a look. Granted, he didn't know her that well, but she definitely had a look. The sort of look that suggested she might have a plan B up her sleeve. Not to mention she wasn't the sort of person to give up easily. So he decided to test her and see just how anxious she was to leave. Jack grabbed a small lint remover from beside the door and gave himself a leisurely once-over. Gwen didn't seem perturbed by the delay. I've a dog at home, and if I'm not vigilant, the fur ends up in my uniform, he explained. She perked up. I love dogs. What kind do you have? Big, hairy mutt. She's the best. Gwen smiled again. I can see you rolling around the floor of your apartment with a big beast of a dog. Aw. Well, frankly, I can still see you rolling around the floor of my hotel room with me. Man, when she looked at him like that, with that heat in her eyes, it really made him wish New Year's Eve came more than once a year. Gwen touched the place where he'd put the plaster on her temple. Thanks for patching me up. He nodded. My pleasure. She grinned, and then noticed one of the cuffs of her white dress shirt was mussed up with a bit of blood and dirt. Jack watched her expertly refold the cuffs at each wrist to hide the stains. If you're done at the sink, may I? She took her bag to the small round mirror above the sink and carefully tidied her makeup, fixing her hair and said, Good to go. Rather than put on her coat, she folded it neatly over her arm. Okay, maybe he'd been wrong. Maybe there wasn't any plan B. Jack paused at the open door, indicating the coat with his chin. It's chilly out there. Maybe you should put on some more clothes too, she said. Probably. Jack turned to grab his jumper and had only just pulled it over his head when he realized Gwendolyn Parker was gone.
Gwen. Torture much? Note to self. Jack Churchill looks hot when he's concerned. It was beyond nice to have him fussing over her, not to mention the bonus of getting to see his muscular forearms up close. But, yeah, the touching was kind of torture. The way his fingers smoothed over her temple, grazing her cheek, made it extremely difficult to stay focused. Thank God she was alone now. She quickly stuffed her parka into the bottom of her bag and picked up her pace. After sprinting around a few turns and dashing down some halls, Gwen slowed to a walk as she neared the core of the palace and sensed the energy of other people in nearby rooms. She pulled a clipboard and a ballpoint pen out of her bag. She twisted her camera so that it hung under the flap of her blazer and took a deep breath. She mentally scrolled through the palace floor plan she'd memorized. You didn't want to show even a lick of hesitation, or your authenticity might be questioned, and got her bearings. And then Gwen lifted her chin, mentally opened her bag of tricks wide, added a competent half-smile and a sense of confident purpose, and strode down the center of the hall in the direction of the throne room. In a room somewhere up ahead, a couple of dogs yipped. Somebody's braying laughter filled the air. Peeking into the doorways on either side of her, Gwen found nothing but typical royal opulence. A lot of red, a lot of gold, a lot of priceless art, and had to suppress a laugh of her own. If it weren't for the wedding, even an unoccupied room in Buckingham Palace would still be worth taking plenty of photos of. But she was aiming for the ace in the hole, so she kept walking. And as she got closer to the heart of the palace, the vibe changed and became even more intense. Voices filtered down the hall, and quick peeks into the side rooms showed the trappings of party preparation. The lovely scent of hyacinth drifted out from one of the open doors up ahead. Gwen gasped, her left hand sliding down toward her camera. She slipped the lens cap off, moved faster toward the perfumed scent, and then paused once more. Voices leaked from the right-hand room. An American, getting knocked down a peg by a Brit over some breach of etiquette. Go figure. Gwen walked confidently into the left-hand room. A genuine sigh escaped her lips as she saw a large display of flowers, obviously in transit to refrigeration. The most gorgeous bridal bouquet she'd ever seen cascaded down its stand. Gwen's heart pounded as she walked into the room and leaned over the table for a whiff. Meredith's wedding bouquet. It was so romantic. She let her camera rest, taking a moment for once to enjoy what was in front of her before going for the shot. And as she finally raised the camera to her face, a firm hand grabbed it by the lens. "Like hell you don't," said a grim, familiar voice. Gwen shrieked and whirled around, her ass knocking into the table. 100 different things seemed to happen all at once. A cloud of gorgeous perfume released into the air. A pair of curious corgis raced into the room and pounced, barking like an 8-legged alarm system. Glass smashed all over the floor. Confetti rained down. No, not confetti. Torn petals and ripped leaves. "What on earth?" cried an accented female voice from somewhere outside the room, followed by a loud thump and a "oof." Jack Churchill's furious eyes narrowed. It was clear from one look that the gentlemanly part of him was gone. This was the Queen's soldier. He lunged at her, pulled her tight against his chest, and dragged her across the room. Rather than fight him off, Gwen protected her camera. Jack threw her over his shoulder in a much less romantic gesture than the one he'd used when she'd fainted, pushed open a connecting door, and shoved her in the back of a cupboard in the adjoining room. He looked over his shoulder, back through the open door, and uttered a silent curse. Then he folded his body unceremoniously into the cupboard with her. Gwen had to shove his arm over to see the aftermath through the cracks at the hinges. The aftermath was something, all right. Through the small gap, Gwen watched a uniformed maid with a shiny black bun take in the flurry of barking dogs, broken glass, and shredded petals and leaves. "Oh, my goodness! Oh, my goodness! Who let the dogs out?" the maid cried. Gwen bit back a laugh. Uncool, Gwen. The poor thing sounded traumatized. The maid turned slightly, revealing an expression of complete horror, and Gwen saw better why. Holy shit, that bouquet is toast. Did I do that? Okay, not my finest hour. Sorry, Meredith. "Oh, my goodness," the maid said again, running full tilt toward the massacre. "Shoo! Get away from the bouquet! And the glass! Bad doggies, bad!" Gwen sat back and realized that meant basically sitting on or against Jack. Or both. "Hi again," Gwen whispered. He looked pissed and gestured for her to zip it. The maid was right there through the doorway of the adjoining room, desperately trying to wrest what remained of the bouquet from the unsympathetic corgis. Gwen opened her lips to merely mouth, "Okay." But he must have misinterpreted. He must have really misinterpreted and thought she was going to talk again, because this time he mouthed furiously, "You've got to shut up." And suddenly that sensual mouth of his was making her do just that. Oh, she thought, as 200 pounds of heated military muscle pressed her to the back wall of the cupboard. Oh, was all she could think, as their bodies reacted at the same time, like getting burned in the best possible way. She felt the shock in his body as he processed what he'd done. And then the moment he took to measure her reaction, to understand that she wasn't pulling away. In that precious, delicious moment of comprehension, Jack swept his tongue across the seam of her mouth. Just one tantalizing stroke, and she opened and let him in. His fingers tensed on her back. She groaned softly with desire, and he pressed his body against her even harder. How did I not get his phone number? New voices rang out in the background, American and British voices. Jack's hold on her body loosened, and he broke the kiss. He peeked through the crack by the cupboard door hinges and then pulled back. Gwen did the same. The dogs were gone. The maid drew her hands from her face and dropped to her knees on the carpet. Jack and Gwen stared at each other, panting, listening. The angry voices coming from the hall were also attracting the attention of the maid. She was still on her knees. Was she actually praying? Well, she sure wasn't leaving. Jack was back to looking displeased, though Gwen could still feel the frantic beating of his heart. Or was that her heart? He remained stock still, his index finger pressed to his lips. "Do not move. Do not say a word," Jack mouthed, and the damp heat of his mouth tickled her ear. Gwen frowned. He was really making it difficult for her to stay focused on her priorities when he kept moving his lips like that, even if it was just to form words. Suddenly the maid straightened up, like she was pulling herself together. "Shit," muttered Gwen. "She's gonna call security. I need to get out of here." "Wait for the right moment," Jack whispered into her ear. Gwen shivered as his lips moved across her earlobe. "This is my arse on the line just as much as yours," he said. "You go when I tell you we're clear to go." "I have to tell you that I find your alpha male Queen's Guard giving orders thing really hot when we're in bed," she said. "But not so much when we're hiding out from the very real possibility of arrest in a hot, sweaty cupboard. I know how to handle these kinds of things. I'm a professional. You're going to make it worse." But Jack did not shift his body out of the way. "You're my responsibility, Gwen. I'm not letting you out, only to have you run rampant again. I'm a member of the Queen's Guard, and you're the equivalent of unleashing a natural disaster inside Her Majesty's palace. I will do my duty and get you the hell out of here before you cock up further what is a very important moment for Britain. But I will do it when I know the moment is right." Okay. Wow. Jack's sense of duty and loyalty seemed to soften every cynical bone in her body. What would it be like to care openly and honestly, and without embarrassment about things like honor and love and joy? Being with Jack was like having a passport to throw away cynical hipster trappings and just enjoy what was before you. Enjoy life. Jack, unfortunately, wasn't exactly enjoying life. He peered through the crack in the cupboard again and made a face as the arguing voices swelled in the hall. Gwen strained to try to hear what sounded like a gossip-worthy argument. "Are you even listening to me?" Jack whispered. Before Gwen could say, "Of course," he continued. "If you'd left properly after I patched you up, you wouldn't be in this situation. But you bollocksed it up and that maid is going to report an intruder." "Yeah, so let's get out of here, now." Gwen shifted, but that had the unfortunate effect of putting her mouth in close proximity with Jack's neck. The Queen's Guardsman was shaved, but a bit of rough stubble rubbed against her lips, nearly invisible against his dark skin in the confines of the cupboard. Jack put up his hand in a "wait for it" signal, as if they were camouflaging themselves on a battlefield and needed to move to different shrubbery. Gwen forced herself not to giggle. Through the crack, she watched the maid move toward the back of the bouquet room, disappearing from view. The sound of water suggested she'd gone into the ensuite bathroom. Perfect. Jack gave the go signal. He pushed open the doors, yanked Gwen down with one hand, guided her through the door with an extremely firm hand on her back, and pushed her out into the hall. She gave a quick salute to the various portraits as they walked, feeling only a little sorry that she didn't have time for photographs. Jack was moving down the hall with long strides, basically dragging her behind him. "You seem tense," Gwen whispered, Settle down and act normal. You'll blow our cover. It's all about looking like you belong. Shut up, Gwen, he hissed. Oh, maybe you should kiss me again. Jack rolled his eyes, but he looked rather pleased when he whispered, Maybe I'll kiss you when we're out of here, after my next shift. I've got to suit up again soon. They came to a corner, and Jack did his reconnaissance peeking thing. Then he signalled again for Gwen to follow. There were a lot more voices, and a lot of people in a lot of different rooms as they headed toward the exit. They had to duck and stop and start a handful of times, taking a more circuitous route than the one Gwen had used to get in. As Jack tugged her along, Gwen could have sworn she saw a sobbing Princess Grace through a doorway. Instinct had her raising the camera with her free hand, but Jack wasn't having it. With a jerk, he pulled her quickly past the doorway, and she lost the shot. Truth be told, she was probably lucky to be with someone who knew the palace layout as well as he did, because with the increase in foot traffic, it wasn't at all certain she'd have made it back out unchallenged. The terrace was just ahead now, with a set of open French doors the final hurdle before making it outside. Or maybe not the final hurdle, Gwen thought, as the sound of two people arguing came toward them from around the corner.
Jack. Jack took Gwen's hand and with a flick of his wrist, reeled her into his body. The same British and American voices from upstairs had followed them. If they were coming after them, well, shit. He whisked Gwen behind the curtains that framed the terrace opening, a clean escape only footsteps away. Peering from behind a swath of fabric, Jack watched two men enter the room. One wore a beautifully tailored suit and impeccably styled hair. Jack recognized him as Henry, a long-time member of the household staff. The other was a dark-haired stranger, dressed in a completely palace-inappropriate leather jacket and jeans. The one thing the two men had in common was a look of strained urgency on their faces. Whatever was going on with them, it was bigger than a bouquet of flowers. "Hey, slow down," the dark-haired one said in an American accent. Henry looked pained. "The more we dawdle, the farther away they will get." "Let's think about this rationally," the American said. "Oh, now you want to be rational? Fine, be rational, but I have to fix this." They crossed the room and were out the door. Jack breathed a sigh of relief when they were gone and went to pull away, but then another uniformed staff member came barreling through the room and out the door. You'd think it was rush hour. Jack's hand tensed on Gwen's waist. She cocked an eyebrow and opened her mouth to speak. He laid his index finger gently over her lips. Her breath hitched and her eyes widened, but she didn't say a word. They stood quietly, waiting once more. Cool air breathed through the room, welcome against Jack's skin. He held Gwen close, his fingers moving slightly over her mouth as she breathed, and the layers of blue velvet and wispy white liners swayed around them. "This is ridiculous," Jack finally muttered, after a period of silence and calm. He moved his finger off her lips and closed his hand into a fist. "I can't believe I'm doing this. On the upside, your sense of honor is making me hot. And you smell really good," Gwen whispered. "Are you kidding me? Damn it, stop being such a turn-on." "No, you really do," Gwen said. Jack didn't want to smile, but he couldn't stop himself. "You are fearless, Gwen." She shrugged with exaggerated innocence. "This is a really bad situation," he said, but it was hard to muster up the proper amount of anger when he was holding Gwen so close that her hair brushed his jaw. "I've gotten out of worse." Jack sighed. "You just had to run from the break room. I was really hoping you weren't going to do that, in spite of the fact that I know you're a girl who likes to run." "Sorry," Gwen said with an "aw shucks" grin. He frowned. "Members of the Queen's Guard are not always the angels one might expect, but you're going to get me in real trouble if anyone figures out you got access to the palace proper through me." "I don't want to get you in trouble. What do you mean when you say you're not much of an angel anyway? Do tell." "Is this off the record?" Gwen laughed. "Yeah. One of my buddies and I took photos sitting on the throne. Gwen blinked. The throne? The Queen's throne? He wrinkled his nose. Not my finest hour. I can't imagine you breaking rules. You're so... She moved her arm up and down to indicate his person. Clean cut. Jack smiled, nice and slow. Gwen's cheeks reddened. Ah, so she just remembered that he wasn't always so clean cut. I think we can go soon. Oh, I thought maybe you and I were making some progress. Not the sneaking around the palace kind of progress. Gwen sighed. What if I refuse to leave? Then I carry you out. She cocked an eyebrow. And if I fight you? Then you create a scene, and when security shows up, you look like a crazy person flailing away like a toddler while I hold you in the air. I appear to be stopping you and end up a hero. You end up in jail. This doesn't look good for me. No, it doesn't. Gwen sighed and studied Jack's face. I've already sold 2 great royal photos worth bang, and I kind of messed up the flowers, which means there's no bouquet to shoot. How about you and I go get some lunch after my next shift? Jack asked. Are you asking me out? Yeah. Usually I'd ask the girl out before getting into a cupboard with her, but you seem to be an exception. That's me. Exceptional. Gwen grinned. More footsteps sounded, and Gwen and Jack fell silent as someone else ran through the room and out the terrace door. After another moment, she whispered, Was that the maid from upstairs? Jack nodded. Yes. The minutes passed, Gwen getting restless in Jack's arms. Maybe we should make out some more if we're just going to stand here, she whispered. He gave her an exasperated look. Gwen grinned. You totally want to make out. She smiled that wide, bright smile of hers, and Jack had to look away to distract himself from taking her up on the suggestion. He peered out from behind the curtain and said, The maid's still outside, talking to a gardener. He's got a truck parked there that looks like good cover. When I say now, we dart out of here and head for the truck. Once we're behind the truck, we pull ourselves together and walk normally to the mews, and you disappear into the crowd. He gave her a pointed look. You do have a normal setting, don't you, Gwen? Oh, Jack, Gwen whispered with a hand to her heart. You really understand me, don't you? He grinned, and then stuck his head out and watched the royal staff members in the terrace garden for a moment. Ready? Always. Now!
Gwen. Jack took Gwen's hand, and they ran side by side for the truck. The quick dash to the truck revealed the maid still looking absolutely traumatized, gesticulating wildly while she talked to the gardener. Gwen felt a twinge of guilt just watching. The maid hugged her arms around her body and looked down. The gardener looked at her like his life would be divine and complete if only he could find a truly effective natural pesticide and the ability to completely solve the lovely maid's problems. Once again, Jack hooked Gwen by the waist and pulled her back with him against the side of the vehicle. Damn, he whispered. That was a little close. I know how to keep all my parts inside the bus, she whispered. I think you just like having an excuse to touch me. I know you know how to keep all your parts inside the bus. It's just that you have a habit of getting out of your seat and taking the wheel. I think you secretly like that about me. I think I must like something about you to put up with all of this, Jack said. It's not a secret. I like you too, she thought. You know, I have dual citizenship. I could stay on in London for a while after the wedding. Gwen trailed off and bit her lip, suddenly embarrassed to be offering more than maybe he wanted. But that was silly. She wasn't going to make the same mistake from New Year's Eve, not when it turned out that both of them had wanted more. You need a reason to stay, Jack asked. Go out with me tonight, and not just because I'm your best hope for getting out of the palace undetected. Go out with me tonight, and let's see if what we've got has legs. Gwen grinned against Jack's neck. Okay. She could feel the intake of breath as he reacted to her mouth on him. He kissed her gently this time. "You ready to get the hell out of this mess?" "Waiting for your signal," Gwen said. They both went quiet, and in the silence, Gwen focused on the conversation between the maid and the gardener. "What?" The maid gaped at the broad-shouldered man, her mouth forming an O of astonishment. The gardener cocked his head. "You didn't know Meredith and her maid of honour have run off? They ran past me as I was driving here. Henry and some biker bloke are giving chase. It's certainly been an eventful 15 minutes, I'll say." "My goodness! She's run away!" The maid's eyes widened into huge circles. "There won't be a wedding." Gwen's own mouth dropped open. "Oh, I'm sure Henry will bring her back in time, even if he has to hog-tie her to do it." The gardener chuckled. That was all Gwen needed to hear. She let go of Jack and stumbled back, her mind racing with possibilities. Opportunities. Jack looked at her, his eyes narrowing as he processed her reaction to the maid's words. Gwen gave Jack a look right back as if to say, "This is serious news." Apparently he'd abandoned the idea of a go signal in favour of just taking the reins and going. He hooked her elbow through his and steered her away from the palace, using those long legs to make good time. Gwen looked over her shoulder, dying to catch more fragments of the maid's conversation. But Jack wasn't having it. He forced them into a walk, smooth, casual, silent. And all the while he shook his head in a vigorous no. "This is big," Gwen hissed. "Huge." Jack's jaw tightened. "I'm supposed to ignore that? Is Jack crazy? Holy mother of paparazzi patron saints, the bride is missing? The bride is missing? Oh God, okay, think. You were in the Grand Hotel lobby when you got that shot of Meredith's ex. It is entirely possible she has gone to see him there, out of the way of the palace. It's not a crazy possibility. And my instincts have been 100% spot on today. OMG. Story of the decade right there. If I can get a picture. Gwen barely noticed how they made it back to the public gates. Only when Jack stopped moving did she process where they were. Safe. Out of palace territory. Nobody arrested, no harm done. Jack looked at his watch and said, "Bollocks, I have to go. And you need to disappear." And then he cleared his throat and cradled her cheek with one palm. "Look, I want to see you again. I'm serious about dinner tonight. Are you game?" Gwen didn't know where to look, what to say, what to do first. "I don't know," she blurted. A wary look replaced the heat in Jack's eyes. "You've got somewhere to run." Gwen's heart just about stopped. "I don't want to run. I've got to follow this lead now. I think there's a life-changing photo out there with my name on it." His hands stiffened against her shoulders. "Leave it, Gwen." "I'm not gonna leave it. I'm having the best day ever. That shot you're seeing of Princess Georgina's hat that's going around, that's mine. And the shot of Meredith's ex in town, mine. And now I've got a lead on a third." "Leave Meredith alone, Gwen. Stop looking for a scandal. This is a special weekend. This is a time for joy, for romance, for coming together." Gwen studied Jack's face. He was serious. He seriously believed what he was saying. He must have read the look on her face. "It's how I feel," he said. "You're a romantic, aren't you?" "You aren't, are you?" "I haven't had much reason to be," Gwen said, thinking of her crappy track record with crappy guys. Swipe left was the mantra on her coffee cup at home. "Maybe you have one now," Jack said with a sweet smile. Jack was different. He almost made her want to drop the idea of going after a picture of Meredith together with her ex. Almost. She blinked, confused about feelings she'd never had before. The ones that said she didn't need to go run after every single prize when something in her heart was telling her that maybe the biggest prize was already right here in front of her. But she wasn't going to be that girl. The one who dropped everything for a guy. The one who suddenly decided her fun job was stupid and she'd rather help her man clean the dog fur off his uniform as a full-time occupation. That's not me either. Gotta go, she said uncertainly. I don't know if I'll be back in time, so... Don't do it, Jack said, with steel in his voice and fire in his eyes. Leave 'em be. Have dinner with me instead. Why don't we reschedule now and... The hard look in Jack's eyes showed his disappointment. Rain check, he said, in a way that sounded like never. It was early evening by the time Gwen left the Hound with fresh camera batteries and a solid plan for hunting down Meredith. The tube ride took forever, thanks to the crowd control barricades that made it slow going to even get into the station. Then you had to use a little ingenuity and some mixed martial arts to get through the crowds lining the platform. Hunting down a shot usually felt like a giant challenge, one that Gwen could savor up until she got what she wanted. Right now, at the end of the day, with 2 great shots and an even better afternoon with Jack behind her, it was hard to muster up her usual enthusiasm for the chase. Gwen pushed through the crowds with a little less delicacy than usual, feeling very off. Stupid Jack. That's your fault. Why do you have to be so noble and sweet to go along with your badass sexy? She even stopped in her tracks on Bond Street and turned back to face the direction of Buckingham Palace. No, stop it, Gwen. You're not the girl who ditches things for a guy. She shook off the urge to go backward and started moving again, toward the hotel where she'd taken that first shot of Meredith's ex. She could see the merry flags above the ostentatious doorway. You have nothing to prove. You can choose a guy if you wanna. She stopped in her tracks, and someone blew a kazoo in her ear. Hey, she yelled. Live a little, cried a smiling businessman, wearing a paper crown and a 3-piece suit. I am, Gwen yelled back irritably. A total lie. What's wrong with just wanting something else sometimes? Just take what you want. And if that's Jack, then turn the hell around. But she didn't. And she'd made it as far as the sidewalk in front of the elegant Bumbleshin's shop when she smacked full force into an adorable short blonde girl wearing an insane red sweatshirt that was almost painful in its royal wedding enthusiasm. It was nothing compared to the ridiculous smile plastered on the girl's face. I'm so sorry, Gwen said, cradling her camera. This is crazy, right? She indicated the bustling crowds. Crazy and pretty much the most romantic thing ever. The girl gripped her by the arms. It's just, when the real world doesn't deliver, it's nice to have something like this to remind you that love is what's important. We're all coming together. And it doesn't matter, not the color of Meredith's skin or who Richard's parents are. They just really love each other and want to be together. What's better than that? What's better than that? A third photo? One that's trying to tear all that down? Ugh. Gwen stared mutely at her. The girl's hands fell away as she refocused on a handsome man with a warm smile exiting Bumbleshin's. The expression on that girl's face, it was like a mirror image of how Gwen felt when she was looking at Jack. Gwen stepped back, fading into the crowd. Her camera hung limply around her neck. She thought of Jack and how she felt when he touched her, when he talked to her. He'd asked her out on a real date. He was interested in seeing where an actual relationship might go. Not to mention, he hadn't turned her into security when she'd run. Which she was giving up for what? For the chance at making Meredith look less deserving of a prince? There was a big difference between taking a picture of a hat and taking a picture that would, at best, badly embarrass someone during a time that should be very special, and at worst, destroy the royal wedding. You don't have to give up your whole damn job to do the right thing now and then, Gwen. That girl was right. Jack was right. What's my problem? My problem is that I don't want to capture the party anymore. I want to be part of it. I want to be with Jack, celebrating. The royal bride might be missing, and the entire wedding could fall apart in scandal if that was what fate had in mind. But it wouldn't be on Gwen's hands. Okay, Jack. This time, I admit it. I'm definitely running. Right back to you. I hope I'm not too late. It was finally going to pour. The rain started falling within moments of Gwen turning back for the palace. She barreled forward, as eager to get through the crowds in the streets, as if Meredith herself were waiting to give a private photo shoot. Back on the tube, back through the crowds, back past the bunting and the spring flowers and the joyous mayhem. Gwen ran with total disregard for anything but the notion that if she did not see Jack before the end of his shift, it would be too late. He'd vanish behind the palace gates without her phone number, and it would be too late to show him that he mattered. Too late for him to understand that it wasn't that she had tried and failed to get the shot and then come slinking back. Too late to explain that she was choosing him over anything else tonight. Still running, she glanced at the time on her phone and swore a blue streak. All these damn people. Buckingham Palace loomed ahead, taking up half the sky. And as she elbowed her way through the crowd in front of the gates once more, Gwen's heart nearly leaped out of her chest. There stood Jack Churchill, proud at his post, loyal soldier and guardian of his country's honour and happiness. Gwen moved up until she was behind the barrier still, but as close as she could get positioned right in front of him. Jack! Jack! I made a mistake. I'm not going for the photo. And if anybody's missing, it's going to be for someone else to worry about, not me. Will you still have dinner with me? Jack didn't answer. He didn't move. Am I too late? Gwen asked, her voice breaking. And then she slammed a palm against her forehead. Oh, shit. I'm such an idiot. You're not allowed to respond. She stared at him, willing him to break the rules and give her some sort of clue. Waited and waited for a sign. And then she had to laugh. If he moved or spoke, he wouldn't be Jack. But then, what if the answer was a bad one? Like, sharp, Gwen. But without the kissing. Or what if no answer was his answer? As if to say she didn't deserve one for not taking him up on his offer when she had the chance. But that didn't seem like Jack either. It was raining a little more now, fatter droplets dripping down her face as she stared helplessly at Jack, staring blankly right through her. She wasn't quite lined up with him anymore. Maybe, just maybe. Oh man, there are so many people out here. Gwen pushed sideways against a beefy tourist. Sorry, I'm really sorry, but this is totally important. Excuse me, pardon me. Make way for the Queen's Guard's guard? Oh man, this sucks. Okay, Jack, listen. If we can have that much fun stuck in a cupboard, how much fun could we have with all the space in the world to move our arms and legs, right? Well, actually, we already know the answer to that. A hell of a lot of fun, right? Jack still did not break from his duty as Queen's Guard to respond. Gwen ran out of steam a little, dropping her arms and just standing in front of him while the rain soaked every inch of her. Okay, I'm gonna give this a chance. I've got spunk, moxie, I'm a can-do girl. She climbed over the barrier, and nobody stopped her. Rather, they seemed to egg her on. Well, you're not pulling your rifle on me, and I know that's allowed, so that's one for the plus column. Gwen looked despairingly at Jack standing in the sentry box. Tasting the rain in her mouth, she brought her face as close as she dared and said into his ear, I'm on the job tomorrow morning. in the scrum capturing wedding guest arrivals outside the chapel. But I'll be waiting for you. If you still want to, come find me there. We can go for a fry-up at the Hound, the pub where we first met last year. If you still... She swallowed hard. If you still want to see what this is we've got between us. I'm not going for that photo tonight. I'm not going anywhere. I'm not going to run this time. Gwen pulled back and smiled at the stone-faced guard, even with her heart pounding and no reason for anything but despair. Okay, Jack. Goodbye. She started walking away, backward, just in case. And with each step that took her farther, she looked for a sign. Nothing. So Gwen pulled her camera from beneath her jacket and took one last picture of Jack's face, because that's how she captured her moments. And then there was nothing for it but to walk away.
Jack. It was the absolute best he could give without breaking form. If Gwen couldn't see it, they were done. His heart pounded as she babbled at him, the rain flattening her hair and trickling down her face. "Come closer, Gwen, love," he said silently. And somehow she did, crashing the barrier in true Gwen style until she stood in front of him, pouring her heart out. He'd have given almost anything to speak. But then she raised her camera and took a picture, and he didn't have to. He never broke form, never opened his mouth, but he'd given her an answer worth more than 1,000 words, right there.
Gwen. Sitting on the bed in her hotel room, Gwen's heart caught in her throat. She held her camera in her hands, the picture of Jack right in front of her on the tiny screen. Tears escaped her eyes and cascaded down her cheeks, still wet from the rain. With a hitch in her breath, she zoomed the picture and saw it. Jack's gift to her. A sparkle in his eye and the teeniest, tiniest quirk of a smile. Just the barest slice of a smile turning up at one side of his mouth. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was everything. Gwen grinned, clutched at her soggy blouse right over her heart, and went to get cleaned up for dinner.
You're listening to Royally Yours by Liz Maverick, starring Lorna Bennett and Gary Furlong. Produced by Realm, your portal to another world. Realm, listen away. Royally Yours is created by Megan Frampton and written by Megan Frampton, K.M. Jackson, Falguni Kothari, Liz Maverick, and Kat McMurray. It is produced by Lydia Shama and executive produced by Julian Yap and Molly Barton. Audio production, sound design, editing, and theme music by Amanda Rose Smith.